Mother Lucy, do you have any idea how the assumption that blacks are inferior to whites began?
It certainly didn't exist among Europeans 1,000 years ago, but I think that was mainly because Europeans had little contact with people south of the Sahara Desert.
What we do know is that in the time period, most of Europe was dominated by a political system known as feudalism, in which kings and emperors had absolute power over their subjects. Below the rulers were the nobility, who had most of the wealth, and the clergy that cooperated with the rulers and nobles to keep the lower classes in line. Then below the nobles and clergy were the peasants, who were free but also poor. The maintenance of a strict social hierarchy meant that peasants would have no chance to become rich and join the nobility.
And even worse than the peasants were the serfs, who were actual slaves, bound to the land and forced to work on farms without pay. But those serfs were of the same nation and skin color as the rest of their society, so it was easy for a serf to escape and seek freedom elsewhere. Being white meant they could blend in and likely avoid capture.
As Europeans began to colonize the American continents in the 1600s, they came up with a solution to the problem of slavery among themselves. They began capturing Africans and taking them across the Atlantic to work on plantations, just as the serfs did in Europe. But being black rather than white meant these slaves would have a much more difficult time escaping to freedom than the white serfs in Europe did.
When you start treating people that look differently from you as inferior, it becomes a habit. You see a slave and think they will be a slave forever because that is their natural destiny. But the fact remains that blacks became socially inferior in the Americas because whites made them so. Were the white serfs in Europe inferior to those above them? Again, only socially. And the whites that made blacks inferior have therefore a moral duty to make them equals. To this day, there are people, in America and around the world, who use corrupt politics and religion to advocate for social conservatism, which is all about returning societies to something like the feudalism of Europe centuries ago. And we must never allow them to drag us back to that way of life, for it degrades us all.
As a white person, I do not feel superior to Lucy at all. Had I lived in Europe 1,000 years ago, I might have been a peasant or even a serf. Also, I am a woman and men might feel superior to me. I am a lesbian and straight women might feel superior to me. I am an atheist and Christians might feel superior to me. You can come up with 1,000 reasons to justify being bigoted and thus conservative, but we only need one reason to be progressive: the common humanity we all share.